All right, everyone. Review Realm here. Gonna keep 2020 rolling here. We're going back to February on this one, Sam. Before things started looking a little bit more bleak this year.
This is an earlier release, which I think I might have looked over. Maybe we mentioned it like months ago, but I don't think I actually listened to it until it was mentioned recently.
Yeah, I think I definitely mentioned it to you at the time, and there's definitely a reason that we're visiting it now. We're talking Sepultura's, you're gonna be surprised by this, 15th album, Quadra. Can't believe it's been that many albums, but you know what? I think that falls into play with the fact that I think Sepultura is really, really overlooked in the scene right now. Like, I think a lot of people think, oh my God, they're still a band. I'm like, yeah, they're still a band. I think people really think of like the Max Cavalera days with like Arise and Chaos AD and Roots and everything like that. I think a lot of people forget that they're still a band right now, and I think they still sound really good.
I agree with you. I'd also add, this is just from my point of view, I think people will look at thrash metal, and if it's not one of the big four, they're like, oh, they're just, rip-offs of one of these four bands. So they always get, bands like this, Overkill, all these other bands get looked. But I will agree with you, this album, this was good.
Quadra is the follow-up to 2017's Machine Messiah. They've been putting out decent albums lately. The last few albums have actually been really well, and Quadra is no exception to that. When I hear the title Quadra, I said, okay, there's got to be 4 in there somewhere. So the whole idea for the album was around, I think, this ideology around like liberal arts called quadrivium, and so that falls into line with Trivium, not the band, but like the idea, like the liberal arts idea. Quadrivium falls in line with learning like arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy, but that's not the part that plays into the album. It's the idea of 4. So what they did with this album, the concept for this album, is they like divided it into 4 different like parts of Sepultura. That first part, those first 3 songs are like, the thrashy part of Sepultura that everybody's really familiar with. The next 3 are how they explored like the sound on Roots. Third part of the album, I think, is trying to be a little bit more unpredictable, maybe more on the progressive side. And then the last part of the album is meant to be, a lot more slower.
It's funny you mention that, because as I was listening to this album, obviously the first half, I'm just, oh, great, this is awesome. This is like classic thrash metal. This is just kicks you in the face. The album starts to change, and I'm just like, what the hell? Well, this isn't thrash metal anymore. Then you get to the instrumentals. By that point, I'm really noticing it's the instrumentals, which is Pentagram, probably one of my favorite songs on the album.
Yeah.
And then towards the end, you had some of the melodic stuff, and that last track, I really like Fear, Pain, Chaos, Suffering.
That track, Fear, Pain, Chaos, Suffering almost feels like a different band to me. I mean, they have a female singer in too, I think, which is from another Brazilian band, but not even just because of that. That was like my one gripe with the album, is I think they should have ended it with Agony of Defeat. Just like the way that the song ends, you just have like that one piano key and like this, and like I thought that was the end of the album, and I thought Fear, Pain, Chaos, Suffering was a bonus track. Part that I thought was weird for the album was the ending of it.
I liked the variety.
I do like the variety on this album.
I think some of my highlights are, like I said, Means to an End, the Pentagram, Fear, Pain, Chaos, Suffering.
You can definitely tell why the first 3 songs on this album were the singles. I mean, Isolation, I love the build up to it, and then it just goes boom, just fast. Means to an End is another one that's really fast, and then so is Last Time. So that's why I think it really falls into the idea of having that 4 different parts of the album, and that first part is just fast. Second part of the album with like Capital Enslavement, Ali, Raging Void. So you have some of those more like tracks that have like that like Roots feel, like a lot more like tribal.
Yeah, I noticed that like midway through the album, I'm like, what's with the Roots stuff? But now we're looking at the analysis of the album. It makes a lot of sense, and I actually really like it. And I think it breaks up the album a little bit. It's a good transition from the thrash to the we're gonna do something a little different towards the rest of the end of the album.
But that next part of the album, which is a little bit more on the progressive side, with like Guardians of Earth. The Pentagram, I love when they do instrumentals. They did an instrumental on the last album called Iceberg Dances, and it was really, really good. And the Pentagram is really good too. I like this idea of them throwing instrumentals into their albums.
It sometimes breaks it up really well. I think, especially with thrash, don't get me wrong, I've always been, I don't know about you, but thrash metal for me has been like, that was kind of part of the gateway for metal for me. And
Yeah.
I love a lot of thrash albums, Megadeth, Metallica, Anthrax, Slayer, Overkill, Sepultura. But sometimes if you don't switch it up, it gets kind of punky or like hardcore-y, where it's kind of like, it can sometimes get repetitive. And sometimes it's good to, you drop an instrumental in the middle of one of these albums, and it like almost helps it revive and pick up steam again.
This is actually their most successful album since their first album with vocalist Derek Green back in 1998. Against falls into line more with, like, I think Sepultura being really overlooked. Yeah, I mean, people think of those 3 albums with Max Cavalera and everything like that. Quadra and the last album for me are ones that stand out for this band too. Like Derek Green, he's a good vocalist.
He's a great vocalist.
I don't think he gets a lot of credit. The album is also really well produced. I love when an album just sounds like clean and pristine like this. Like anything by Nuclear Blast, like I'm automatically interested in, just because they have such a great sound to the albums that they're behind.
There are 3 different, I think, types of mixes. There are people who are like just raw, I don't want to say underproduced, but they're just raw, very crunchy. It sounds like you record it in front of your tape player, which isn't bad. It works for some musicians, works for some albums. Then you have stuff where it's overproduced, where you're like, okay, you were producing this album more than you wrote the album, and it sounds super, super clean, almost uncomfortably clean. And then there's something like this where the crunch is still there, it's heavy, but it's clean and it's very listenable.
Now I think you know why I wanted you to go to this album, because I heard it in February and I said I have to go back to this at some point. Can't let this album go out overlooked. Another little small interesting thing is they actually went to Sweden to make this album.
What pushed them to go into Sweden?
Must have been the producer.
Because I know sometimes there'll be bands that'll like travel out of the country or whatnot because they want to work with a certain producer and work in a certain studio.
This guy has worked with a lot of big bands.
Jens Borgen. Oh, okay, I know exactly who he is.
Yep.
That's why the album sounds incredible. He's a good mixer. He's a good producer.
Oh, yeah, I see why. Yeah, this is an album. I mean, I'm sure after you've watched this review, this is probably an album you've listened to. If you haven't listened to this album by some reason, go back to this album and listen to them. I don't think people should skip out on the albums that this band is putting out still. 15 albums they've been putting out.
This is a sleeper for me, personally. I mean, obviously there's people out there looking forward to their music, but if you're not a big Sepultura fan, or you're not familiar with their music, or you want to check something new out, I would highly suggest this album.
So that's our thoughts on Quadra. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Heck, leave 4 comments since we're on the concept of 4. whatever you want to do. If you like other album reviews like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. We have a few more album reviews left for 2020, and then finally, before the year is out, our top 10s from each of us.
Stay tuned.